Behind the gleaming facade of a millionaire businessman, a devoted husband, and a sprawling Tudor mansion on 18 acres lay a horrifying secret: over 10,000 fragments of human bone buried just beyond the garden. This is Fox Hollow Farm, where the American dream transformed into Indiana's worst nightmare. This is the story of Herb Baumeister, a man who appeared to have everything. A successful family, a thriving business career, yet harbored the nature of a predator who operated in darkness for years. Before we delve into this chilling case, if you're interested in true crime stories that examine the darkest corners of human behavior, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you meticulously researched cases with respect for the victims and their families, examining not only what happened, but what we can learn to prevent future tragedies. Herbert Richard Baumeister was born in 1947 into a middle-class family in Indianapolis, Indiana. His father worked as an anesthesiologist, a profession that would later take on disturbing significance when examining Herb's methods. From an early age, those around young Herb noticed behaviors that in hindsight suggested something profoundly wrong. He displayed an unusual fascination with death, engaged in disturbing acts with animal remains, and once placed a dead crow on a teacher's desk. Perhaps most concerning was his peculiar fixation with urine, a behavior that both peers and adults found deeply unsettling. During his adolescent years, Herb was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder. These are serious mental health conditions that, when left untreated or inadequately managed, can have devastating consequences. Paranoid schizophrenia is characterized by delusions and auditory hallucinations, often causing individuals to lose touch with reality and harbor irrational beliefs about persecution or conspiracy. Antisocial personality disorder involves a persistent pattern of disregard for the rights of others, lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, and an inability to form genuine emotional connections. Throughout criminal history, there have been documented cases where individuals with these diagnoses have engaged in violent behavior. However, it is critically important to note that the vast majority of people living with schizophrenia or personality disorders are not violent and are, in fact, more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. The intersection of untreated severe mental illness, specific personality traits, and environmental factors creates a complex picture that researchers and clinicians continue to study. In Herb's case, he never received comprehensive treatment. Instead, according to later accounts, he learned to wear a mask to present a facade of normalcy that allowed him to navigate society while concealing his true nature. In 1971, Herb married Julie, and together they would have 3 children. To outward appearances, they seemed like any other successful American family. Herb demonstrated considerable business acumen, eventually establishing a chain of thrift stores called Save a Lot that proved quite profitable. The family appeared stable, prosperous, and unremarkable. Yet beneath this veneer of suburban success, Herb led a double life. While his wife and children were away, he would frequent gay bars in Indianapolis under the alias Brian Smart. This secret existence would eventually lead him down a path of violence that would shock the nation. In 1990, using proceeds from his successful business ventures, Herb purchased Fox Hollow Farm, an estate property valued at over $1 million. The property sprawled across 18 acres in the affluent Hamilton County area north of Indianapolis. The main house was an impressive Tudor-style mansion featuring an indoor swimming pool, extensive grounds, and, most significantly, a wooded area that provided privacy and seclusion from neighbors and passers-by. For Herb, this isolation would prove crucial to his activities. The indoor pool area became central to what investigators would later piece together as Herb's modus operandi. According to evidence gathered during the investigation and witness testimony, Herb would approach young men at gay bars in Indianapolis, introducing himself as Brian Smart. He would strike up conversations, present himself as friendly and trustworthy, and eventually extend invitations to pool parties at his estate. Those who accepted found themselves at Fox Hollow Farm, often during periods when Herb's family was away on extended trips. The pool area presented a bizarre and unsettling scene. Investigators later documented that Herb had arranged numerous mannequins around the pool in various poses as if frozen mid-party. This strange tableau served multiple purposes. It created visual confusion for visitors, making it difficult to immediately assess how many real people were present. It also established a facade of normalcy and festivity, potentially lowering the guard of those who might otherwise feel uncomfortable being alone with someone they had just met. The mannequins stood as silent witnesses to what would transpire in that space. According to investigative findings and survivor testimony, Herb employed a method that exploited both trust and a practice known as erotic asphyxiation, the restriction of oxygen during sexual activity. Using pool hoses and similar implements, he would engage victims in what initially appeared to be consensual activity before applying fatal force to their necks. The application of pressure to the carotid arteries can cause unconsciousness in seconds and death within minutes if sustained. Victims would have had little opportunity to fight back effectively once the attack commenced. After these killings, Herb faced the challenge of disposing of remains. The wooded acreage behind the mansion provided the answer. During times when his family was absent, particularly during summer vacation periods, Herb would transport bodies to the forested area. Evidence suggests he engaged in a methodical process of dismemberment, burning of remains, and crushing of bone fragments. Some reports indicate he went so far as to remove teeth from victims before scattering them across the property, a calculated effort to prevent identification of remains through dental records. This systematic destruction of evidence demonstrates a level of planning and awareness of forensic procedures that complicated later identification efforts. The disappearances began drawing attention in the early 1990s. Members of Indianapolis's LGBTQ community started vanishing without explanation. Families reported loved ones missing. Friends noticed absences. Yet according to later criticism, law enforcement response was inadequate. Whether due to institutional bias, lack of resources, or simple failure to connect disparate missing persons reports, no concentrated investigation emerged initially. This would prove one of the most painful aspects of the case for families and community members who felt their concerns were dismissed or minimized. Among those who encountered Herb and survived was Tony Harris. In what would prove a crucial turning point, Tony met a man calling himself Brian Smart at a gay bar. Accepting an invitation to Fox Hollow Farm, Tony found himself at the estate with its peculiar arrangement of mannequins around the pool. At some point during the encounter, Herb attempted to strangle Tony using a pool hose. In a moment of quick thinking that likely saved his life, Tony pretended to lose consciousness. Herb, believing he had succeeded, released the pressure. Tony remained still, continuing the ruse until he could safely extract himself from the situation. Rather than simply fleeing and trying to forget the traumatic experience, Tony made a courageous decision. He returned to the same gay bar where he had met Brian Smart and waited. It took months of vigilance, but eventually the man reappeared. This time, Tony was prepared. He carefully noted the license plate number of the vehicle Herb drove and reported it to police. This information would later prove instrumental in connecting the disappearances to a specific individual and location. Meanwhile, troubling discoveries were occurring at Fox Hollow Farm itself. In 1994, Herb and Julie's 13-year-old son was playing in the wooded area behind the house when he found what appeared to be a human skull. When he brought this disturbing find to his parents, Herb had an explanation ready. He claimed it was a medical skeleton that had belonged to his father, the anesthesiologist used for educational purposes. According to later accounts, Julie either believed this explanation or chose to accept it, perhaps unable or unwilling to confront the alternative possibilities. The skull was not reported to authorities at that time. By 1996, multiple factors were converging. The Baumeister marriage was deteriorating. Police pressure was increasing as investigators worked to follow up on Tony Harris's information and the ongoing missing persons cases. The business was struggling financially. In June of that year, as the relationship reached a breaking point, Julie made a decision that would finally expose the truth. With Herb away from the property, she granted permission for law enforcement to search Fox Hollow Farm. What investigators found exceeded their worst expectations. Across the wooded area behind the mansion, bone fragments littered the surface. Some were partially buried, others lay exposed to the elements. The sheer volume was staggering. Forensic teams began the painstaking work of collection and analysis. Over the course of the excavation, they recovered more than 10,000 bone fragments. Based on forensic examination, investigators estimated these remains represented at least 25 different individuals, though the exact number may never be known with certainty. The condition of the remains presented enormous challenges for identification. The burning and crushing of bones had destroyed much of the biological material that would typically be used for DNA analysis or other identification methods. Teeth, often crucial for victim identification, had been deliberately removed in many cases. The fragmentation was so severe that reassembling complete skeletal profiles proved impossible in most instances. This was not accidental. The evidence suggested a deliberate and systematic effort to prevent identification and accountability. When news of the search broke, Herb was already gone. Realizing that authorities were closing in, he had fled. He drove north across the border into Ontario, Canada. On July 3, 1996, in a park near Toronto, Herbert Baumeister died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 59 years old. Herb left behind a suicide note spanning 3 pages. The contents focused primarily on his failed business ventures and the collapse of his marriage. He expressed frustration and despair about his financial situation and personal life. What the note did not contain spoke volumes: no confession, no remorse, no answers for the families who desperately needed them. Even in death, he maintained a focus on himself and offered nothing to those seeking answers about their missing loved ones. The process of identifying victims would stretch across decades. The damaged state of the remains meant that traditional identification methods were often impossible. As DNA technology advanced over subsequent years, investigators periodically returned to the evidence, hoping new techniques might yield results where earlier methods had failed. In 2024, nearly 3 decades after the discovery, advanced DNA analysis finally identified 2 more victims, Manuel Resende and Jeff Jones. Their families, who had lived without answers for years, finally received confirmation of what had happened to their loved ones. The scars from this case have never healed. For Indianapolis's LGBTQ community, the tragedy revealed a brutal reality. When their young men began disappearing, few seemed to care. The missing persons reports piled up, but the response was slow, the urgency absent. For the families left behind, the pain was compounded by an absence of answers. Many could not even know for certain if their son, their brother, their loved one was among the shattered bones at Fox Hollow Farm. Herb had not only taken their family members, he had stolen their identities, making even a proper goodbye impossible. Mothers and fathers were denied the chance to lay their children to rest. The deliberate destruction of remains was a final act of cruelty that extended beyond death itself. Fox Hollow Farm still stands today. The property has changed hands multiple times since 1996. It remains a physical reminder of the terrible events that occurred there, a place where evil hid behind suburban respectability. Some have speculated about the number of victims beyond those whose remains were found on the property. The timeline of disappearances and Herb's activities suggest the possibility of additional victims, potentially in other locations. Without a confession or detailed records, many questions remain unanswered. Herb Baumeister took those secrets with him. The Fox Hollow Farm case teaches us a chilling lesson. Evil does not always wear a visible mask. The monster can be the successful businessman next door, the friendly neighbor at the barbecue, even someone within our own families. And every missing person deserves to be searched for with equal urgency, regardless of who they are or who they love. This case also highlights ongoing challenges in mental health intervention. While we cannot and should not attribute violent behavior solely to mental illness, the failure to provide comprehensive, sustained treatment to individuals diagnosed with serious disorders represents a missed opportunity for intervention. A society that addresses mental health proactively, that destigmatizes treatment, and that provides accessible care may prevent some tragedies before they unfold. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below based on the facts of this case. What systemic changes might help prevent similar tragedies? How can we better support both mental health intervention and marginalized communities who may be at risk? Please remember to keep discussion respectful and fact-based. If you found this examination of the Fox Hollow Farm case informative, please subscribe to our channel for more detailed explorations of true crime cases. We approach each story with respect for victims and their families while seeking to understand the failures that allowed these tragedies to occur. Thank you for watching.